everyone. Welcome to this movement call, Community Monitoring in Mining, turning local evidence into action. We'll give it a couple of minutes for people to join. In the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and where are you joining from. And we'll begin in just a minute. So great. I think we can now start because we have a full pack call today. So we want to take advantage of every minute. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Carlos Asunsolo. I'm part of NAMATI's Global Land and Environment and Climate team. First of all, on behalf of NAMATI, the Grassroots Justice Network, and the Global Justice Clinic at NYU School of Law, we want to welcome you to this space. We hope this will be a useful and enriching conversation for all of you. Before we begin, just a few reminders. This call has simultaneous interpretation in English, Spanish, French, and Burmese. So to choose your preferred language, please click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's like a small circle planet, and select the language you would like to listen to. Also, if you can rename yourself on Zoom with your name and the organization, please keep your microphone muted when you are not speaking, and if connection allows, we invite you to turn your camera on so we can have like a more close interaction. Because this is a large call and we have limited time, we will use mainly the chat to make the conversation more interactive. So in each section, we will share a question that we would like you to answer in the chat. You can also use the chat to share specific questions for any of the speakers. So please, we encourage you to use as much as you can the chat. We will be the ones gathering all that questions and grouping them for panelists. If you are not able to answer everything during the call, if we are not able to answer everything during the call, we will follow up afterward and share additional information with you. So again, please use the chat. Your participation there will be very important. So, sorry, before we start, we want to, and we were to a conversation, we will start with a quick poll. And we want to ask you, when you hear community monitoring, what feels the closest to your understanding? Is it something that communities paying attention to changes around them? Is it communities documenting impacts in a more organized way? Do you feel like it's a technical process led mostly by experts? Is it a tool that communities can instead demand action, or is it other thing? And if you choose other, please put it in the chat. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when we hear about community monitoring? I'll give a minute for people to answer the poll. But I'm seeing option 2. It's the one that it's getting the most votes around. So it's communities documenting impacts in an organized way. That's a good sense. Okay, yes, I think 61% now. In second place, I think it's the first one that it's communities paying attention to changes around them. That's definitely a very basic step on community monitoring. So that's a good answer as well. Okay, so we now have a sense in the room what we understand on community monitoring when we hear community monitoring. So thank you. I will end the vote now. And you have the results there. So again, I think it's what most of the group think about community monitoring is communities documenting the impacts in an organized way. So that's good. That's a good sign. Okay, so we now can move into the most important part of our conversation. And thank you for the responses. I'm very happy to introduce today Sienna Miropi. Sienna is the co-director of the Caribbean Climate Justice Initiative and the director of Indigenous Land Rights and Earth Defense Project through the Global Justice Clinic at NYU Law School. Both projects, I think, partner with communities and organizations on the front lines of the climate crisis to defend their environmental, economic, social, and cultural rights and support efforts to secure land rights and build community power. I want to take a moment to thank you, Sienna, and Ellie as well, because you were so generous agreeing to co-host this conversation with us and for all the support through the process. It has been a real pleasure to collaborate with you. So I will hand it over to you, Sienna, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here for this important conversation. And Carlos, thank you so much for that kind intro, and to you and Namati for inviting us to co-sponsor this call. So as Carlos said, my name is Sienna. I work with the Global Justice Clinic at NYU School of Law. We're an applied learning lab within the law school that works with community-based partners to redress, prevent, challenge economic, racial, climate, and migration injustice. And it's a real privilege to be here and moderating this conversation today, and especially to have on our panel two of our long-standing partners from Haiti and from Guyana, and to have had the chance to partner with them over the years in their efforts to resist and assert their communities' rights in the face of gold mining, including through community-based monitoring. So we're here to discuss community monitoring today, and all of you have already engaged and begun to engage with the different ways that we can understand community monitoring. I want to say just a couple of words of introduction and then speak as little as possible so that we can hear from our expert panelists today. As we know, mining has tremendously serious impacts on communities and the environment. And one of the big challenges of holding mining operators accountable is that there is often a huge information asymmetry between mining operators and those who are impacted by their operations. Mining companies and mining operators often hold a huge amount of information and data, while the communities who are impacted by their operations and even often government regulators hold relatively little information. Community monitoring is a way to challenge this asymmetry. It's a way for communities who are on the front lines of mining and indeed of other industries to both gather useful data and assert the knowledge they hold in ways that can support organising, accountability efforts, regulatory action, and even systems-wide change to prevent future harms. I'm going to pause here because I'm having an echo, and I just want to check if others can hear me clearly on the call without interference. I'm seeing a couple of nods, so I'm going to keep going and assume that others can hear me clearly. Wonderfully. So even the very act of community monitoring, as we'll explore through this call, can be a way to shift balance between communities and mining companies, both by showing that mining companies that people are watching them, and also, as we'll explore, because the act of community monitoring in and of itself is a tool for building community power and organising. So today we'll explore the power of interdisciplinary collaboration, the ways that scientific and community knowledge can be brought together, and different types of technical tools that communities can deploy to advance community monitoring, for example, satellite footage. And as we'll also underscore, and as I want to state clearly from the start of this webinar, community monitoring does not require specialised tools and expertise. It is something, as we already saw in the poll, that communities can do themselves by carefully and systematically observing their surroundings and recording what they see. And communities' own lived knowledge and expertise about their environment is itself powerful expertise from which to document changes as a result of mining. The final thing I'd like to say by way of introduction is that it's particularly apt and important for us to have this conversation in this moment. And I think the huge amount of participation on this learning call really speaks to that. We're seeing surging gold prices around the world really fuel an expansion of gold mining and interest in gold mining globally. And I'm sure as many people on this call know far better than me, we're also seeing more and more communities on the front lines of mining impacts as we face a global extractors rush fueled by the global energy transition as a result of the climate crisis. So in this context, discussing and having practical lessons about community monitoring is arguably more important than ever. So by way of that introduction, let me just say a little bit about how we'll proceed today. So we're going to hear 4 sets of interventions, and we're going to try and keep them dynamic and structured around question and answers. As Carlos mentioned, each sort of set of interventions will have a prompting question for participants to reflect on. Please put your answers in the chat, and those will inform the question and answer response with all participants that we really hope to hold as much time for as possible later in this discussion. I will introduce each panelist in more detail as we come to them, but just to give everyone a little bit of a sense of the flow of today's conversation, we're first going to hear about community monitoring as a preventative tool in the context of mining. And we'll learn there from experiences in Haiti, where communities carried out a baseline study of water quality in areas that were under mining permit, but before mining activity began. We're then going to hear about how community monitoring works in practice, and also about the strategies that communities can use to ensure that the data that they are gathering is recognised as rigorous by outside actors, and thus can be used effectively to engage regulators, mining companies, and other stakeholders. And we'll hear from examples in Guyana and Guinea in that context. And finally, we're going to learn about how community monitoring can contribute to broader movement building, advocacy, and accountability efforts beyond one specific community and context. So with that said, let me now take us to our panelists. And we're first going to hear from Henri Jean-Pierre, or James, and Beth Hoagland, who are going to co-present and who will speak to community monitoring as a preventative tool. So before I introduce James and Beth, we have our first short prompting question that we encourage you all to reflect on and answer in the chat. And that question is, and we'll also write it into the chat, what information could communities document early to better protect their water, land, and territory from mining risks or other harmful activity? So I'll just pause so folks can read that question, which should hopefully be in the chat. I think it's being put in the chat right now.
D'entrée de jeu, j'en profite pour saluer toute l'équipe qui sont à la base.
Please allow me to say hello to all the members of this initiative.
Merci. Sorry to cut you off, James. I want to ensure I introduce you and the work that you've done. So let me do that briefly right now. And James will intervene in French. So for those of us who are not Francophone, this would be a moment to go to the interpretation and select English. James, thank you so much for being here this morning. Auguste Jean-Pierre, or James, is a human rights activist with training in law and political communications in crisis settings. And we've been lucky enough to work with him through the Global Justice Clinic, through its partnership with Collectif Justice Mine in Haiti, where he worked for 3 years with the Right to Water program, including coordinating field research and serving as a liaison amongst the project's partners. Beth Hoagland is a hydrologist and geochemist at SS Papadopoulos and Associates, and she specializes in evaluating water resource contamination from various sources, including mining, and has worked with mining impacted communities in Haiti, Guyana, Papua New Guinea, and the US. So James, apologies again for cutting you off earlier, and please now let's go to you. And I want to tee us off with a question, actually. So as I've already said, you were involved in a team that completed what I understand to be the first baseline water study owned by a community that documented water conditions in an area under mining permit before a mining company built a mine. And the study documented water quality and availability in the area. And so the question I want to tee off the conversation with is, why did residents and activists want to document water conditions before mining began? So over to you.
Okay, bonjour. Et
Yes,
bonsoir.
hello, good evening, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you. Please allow me to say that these activities are very interesting because they allow to the global citizens to reflect on a question that is environment, the link between mining activities and environment with regards to different elements. We also have to say that prevention is important, but to speak about prevention, we do have to contextualize the issue. So it is a principle under which before starting of a mining project, a project that might have a great impact on the environment, we do have to try to look for more information about the potential impacts through impact studies and try to react beforehand so as to have some prevention tools and anticipate. So our experience with regards to the prevention, we do have to keep this in mind. For our study in Haiti, we work with the New York University and other institutions and members of the community that were targeted. We do have to have a great understanding of all the prevention principles. We might speak of responsibility, but we also have to engage the responsibility of the company. So the preliminary information are crucial. The work, the research work we did with the communities in terms of surveillance, monitoring, were done with the community. It is very important to underline this. We try to observe the evolution of certain elements because mining activities might have consequences on water resources even before they do start. So that are things we do have to monitor and to study. We will have to try to control the water resources in terms of quantity of water that is available and in terms of quality of water. We did this through some testing in a perimeter on which the mining activity was granted, to see if there were some heavy metals, some chemicals in water, and we tried to detect other substances that may not be chemical. And we worked with those data and shared them. And systematically, we did this because monitoring has to be systematized. If we want to monitor correctly, it's not a question of working 1 week or 1 month. It must be some study and tests that are repeated over time so as to detect the presence of a chemical substance in water, for instance. From the point of view of the quantity of water, with the help of technical experts, we tried to assess the flow of water so as to know this flow and gather information and have a basic idea. We can then systematize these information and share them. So if you want, and that's how we do proceed in this sense.
Thank you, both for laying out so clearly what was done and also really grounding us in the importance of anticipating impacts and deep knowledge of the community. And so I think my next question building on that is, I know, and you've already spoken to 3 sets of actors being involved in the study: scientists, human rights lawyers with the Global Justice Clinic, and community members. And could you speak a little bit more about the role of community members and the work that they led in the study?
Eh bien, lorsqu'on parle des
Yes,
travaux dans les
so when
communautés,
working of the works in the community, it is a combination of several actors. Communities did so a part of the job, a preparatory job in the field before the scientists arrived, and there were and other experts that will support the communities and explain them. So all those people will be there to help the community. And when they all arrive, the community members target the technical works. For instance, the use of technology that helps us to know where are the water resources and help us to do some statistics. We did this commonly with the organization member and the communities. So it is a way of preventing. Another element that is important is the principle of participation and information. Even if inside the community there is no expert chemical or specialist, there are people that can bring some more information to the study and help, because they know the movements, for instance. We transmitted the knowledge gathered with the help of the community member to the specialists and scientific or experts, generally with the help of university members. There is the support of each student, for instance, so as to transfer the knowledge. That was the responsibility of the community. And it is important because it is a responsibility for the activity of the field experts, scientists that will come afterwards. And we had some civil society organization collaborating also, so as to facilitate the contacts with the specialists and the community members, for instance. And everything was done this way with this collaboration principle.
for sharing the way those different types of knowledge and expertise really come together. James, you've, I think, started to allude to this, but I think my final question is just what are some of the benefits that you have seen from doing this study?
Très bien. Et il faut dire que les avantages de cette
Right.
étude
The benefits of this study
trois niveaux.
can be
D'abord,
classified in
l'étude a
3
permis
levels.
aux membres des communautés
First,
de
it
savoir
allowed the community members to
d'approfondir la connaissance sur la réalité de
deepen
l'eau
their
dans la
knowledge of
Eh bien,
the
cette expérience nous a permis
resources
quoi? D'identifier la
of the
présence
community,
des
identify the
substances
presence of
dans l'eau.
substances
Par exemple,
in water
là
resources.
où on a réalisé l'étude, c'est
Where we did the
rural, eh bien,
study,
utilisant de l'engrais dans l'agriculture,
for instance, we observed the
on
use
a
of
identifié la
fertilizers
présence
for
d'une substance
agriculture,
chimique qu'on appelle nitrate.
and
Une forte quantité de
we
nitrate.
saw the
Mais,
use of high
grâce à l'étude, eh bien, la
quantities
communauté a
of
identifié cela. Eh bien, cette présence de nitrate dans l'eau, eh bien,
nitrogen, for
les
instance,
membres
and the presence
d'organisation
of
de la communauté
those
ont
kind of substances in
contacté
water
une institution qui travaille en Haïti
allowed
sur
us
l'eau. Eh
to
bien, cette
contact
institution a
with
fait une
some
intervention.
specialized
Grâce à ce
institution that
travail, eh bien, on a
was
facilité la
able
rencontre des
to
membres des communautés, des ONG, des
go
institutions qui travaillent
deeper and to
sur l'eau, sur le
mobilize
droit à l'eau en Haïti.
NGOs
Eh
or
bien,
other
cette
organizations
initiative
in Haiti.
a
That was an
facilité
initiative that facilitated collaboration,
Deuxièmement,
contact, and
il
deepening
faut dire
of
que
the study. Then another
cet
element
impact a
was
fait quoi? Eh bien, cet impact,
that we were able to assess better the impact, so as to have a good community mobilization about the changes perpetrated in water and resources. This change allowed us, after some testing were done, that allowed the community member to meet and agree some actions out of the scope of the study. And the last element is that the study allowed the community to collect some data about the water in terms of quality and quantity, the quality of atmosphere. So we were able to do a database rich in information, and when the mining company will come and the extractive industry will come, if there are some more impact in water for the environment, the community will be able to use all that was previously gathered to get the companies to court if it is necessary, because when you are before the court, you have to have some evidence. So all the gathered data will be able to serve as evidence. So that's one of the greatest benefits of this study. It will be useful for us, for all the companies. Thank you very much.
To end on, and I really appreciate and I'm struck by you pulling out not just the utility for future engagement with a mining company, but the way it's allowed the community to mobilize and also to gather data about the right to water in ways that support engagement with regulators outside the immediate threat of mining. Thank you for sharing all of that. Beth, I'll go to you, I think, relatively briefly to complement. James has spoken about the bringing together of different types of knowledge, and I wanted to invite you from your perspective as a scientist to complement that. What was the value of the community knowledge to the water study, and how did the ways that the community organized and prepared the field, how is that useful to you as a scientist coming in?
Yeah, thanks, Sienna. And it's really great to be here with all of you all this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. And thanks, James, for setting up that stage and the context of the Haiti study so nicely. I'd say the community knowledge was not only valuable, but very essential in developing the baseline water study we did in Haiti. As scientists, there are some tools available to us, such as satellite data, geospatial data, mapping tools or reports and literature. However, these tools don't tell us highly local site-specific information about land use and water resources that can only be provided by a community through their lived experience. So what a scientist in the United States might label or name a stream in Haiti is nowhere near what the community actually refers to as that stream name. So there's little details like that that the community could really help us with. And one specific example from Haiti that the community did before we ever came in to assist was they did a water point census. So community organized actually developed and gathered data on information such as how many community members were living in each household, the name and the location of their primary water supply, the location of public water resources where many families relied on a water resource, how the different water resources were used for drinking or bathing or fishing, as well as information on what water resources people were already avoiding. And so this data was essential because it allowed the science team and the community team to come together and collectively arrive at a set of prioritized monitoring locations where we would go back and collect data. So you're seeing some pictures here on the screen of locations where we decided it would be beneficial to collect water quality samples on a more limited basis for analysis in a lab, such as metals, bacteria, nutrients like nitrogen. Other locations we determined would be beneficial to install actual piping and deploy sensors that we put in to collect long-term measurements, I think, of water levels for almost a year. And then in other locations, we decided collectively that they would be good water resources to monitor on a frequent, routine, continuous basis. And that monitoring was led by community members such as you're seeing now, Maxen, who had handheld water sensors, and they went back and collected measurements, every few weeks or months, recorded those, and synthesized the data to build this really robust data set.
In the interest of time, I think I'll just go straight to my next question.
Sure.
And it's a general one, so apologies. But will you say a couple of words about what you see as the value of doing community baseline studies in the context of mining prior to mining activity taking place?
Sure. I think there's a lot of different things that are valuable from community-owned baseline studies. Two that stand out to me are proof and perspective. So a lot of cases, if any data is collected prior to mining, it's done by the mining company and from the perspective of the mining company. So getting community perspective and making sure their priorities are emphasized in data collection efforts is very valuable, and it's something that can really only be led by the community. And then the proof, if data is collected, it's not usually publicly available. And so it's very valuable for the community, I think, to have ownership over their data set so that they can, after changes or harms occur to their land or water resources, they have evidence that can be used in advocacy and legal contexts with that data that they've collected.
James and Beth, thank you so much for really grounding us in this conversation in community monitoring before mining occurs. And so we're now going to move to the next stage of the discussion, which is really about community monitoring in the context of active mining. And so we'll go to our next speaker, Tushar Nicholas Fredericks of the South Rupert District Council in Guyana, to talk about their community monitoring program and how it works in practice. And as we enter this next phase of the conversation, we have another guiding and reflection question, which we'll put in the chat, which is, what is one way that communities in your context are already tracking company activities or potential harms, even if informally? So I'll just give folks a couple of moments to read that question and reflect on it before I introduce Tushar Nick. Great. And we will be gathering and reflecting on your responses to inform the Q&A. So Tushar Nicholas Fredericks is the chair of the South Rupununi District Council, the legally recognised representative body of the 21 mostly Wapashan Indigenous communities of the South Rupununi region in Guyana. He's also Tushar, or elected village leader of Shulanab village in the South Rupununi. Amongst many other accolades and roles, Tushar Nick has been extensively involved in the SRDC's work to map and monitor Wapashan territory and to use community-generated data to assert communities' rights in the context of gold mining. So Tushar Nick, hopefully the connection holds, and really over to you to talk us through how the monitoring program came to be, how it operates in practice, and how you and the SRDC have been able to use the data that you generated. And I'm hoping that we have you on the link and that you're able to bring yourself onto camera.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm trying with the camera here, Sienna. I'm not sure what's happening.
No worries. Tushar, I think let's see if you can get it on as you go on. But I think I would just invite you to start off and try and troubleshoot while you go, if that's okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. From Guyana, South Rupununi in South America. I'm Nicholas Fredericks, Tushar of Shulanab village. I'm also the chair of the South Rupununi District Council, which is the representative body of the 21 Wapichan communities in Southern Guyana. So this morning we want to talk about community monitoring. Well, just like I said, the South Rupununi District Council comprised of 21 Wapichan communities in the South Rupununi of Guyana. We are a legal body according to the Amerindian Act of 2006, which is the law that govern Indigenous people in Guyana. So one of the things that we do here is community monitoring. We monitor the two main areas, which is mining. Most of the mining happening in the Marudi area in the South Rupununi. And we also monitor the border between Guyana and Brazil. On the western part of our territory is a border between Guyana and Brazil. And because of illegal gold smuggling and cattle rustling, the monitoring program was actually born out of years of consultation that was done from 2008 to 2012 in the development of our management plan. But even beyond that, in 2002, we did a customary use of biological resources mapping exercise where we mapped out our territory, our sacred sites, our ecological areas. So those information from the map has really been useful in allowing us to identify areas, vulnerable areas that would need monitoring. So in 2012 and 2013, our communities agreed that monitoring should be done within the territory. And so we started to look at the mining area in Marudi. As you can see, the photograph on the slide here has really been expanding over the last couple of years. We were able to identify key areas where our monitors would go and use some of the equipment that we have, thanks to the Global Justice Clinic for their continued support that they have been given to the SRDC to allow us to build our capacity to access certain instruments that will really help us in gathering our data. So again, as a community monitoring program, it is very critical that we have international partners with the capacity and with the resources and the technology that can assist us to not only gather data, but to analyze data for advocacy. So through the monitoring program, we were able to also build our capacity through the various trainings that we have, and we are still on continuously receiving training to build our team's capacity. The monitors that we have are very knowledgeable of the area. They are bushmen. They know the areas, they know the spawning grounds, they know the different multiplying grounds, wildlife areas, the creeks, the layout of the creeks and where they're connected. So a lot of our monitors are people from the ground, from the communities who have vast knowledge of the environment. So that in itself helps a lot because you don't need to train people to go out into these areas. These people have grown and has walked these forests, for generations, and that is important. So our monitoring program is really to support the communities to identify threat and to support communities in how do they deal with threats and issues within the territory. So, like I said before, we have worked with technical partners. We continue to collaborate with institutions like the Global Justice Clinics and others. We will continue to do this monitoring program. With the data, a lot of data have been gathered from 2012 onwards, but then the issue was what do we do with the data? So again, we, with our partners, were able to put some of the data into context. We have a 5-year monitoring report that we are currently using in discussion with the government. And when I say the government, I mean we are having high-level discussion with the president himself and with subject ministers. Most importantly, as you know, Guyana is going into the 30% of protection of forests by 2030. Well, the world is moving in that direction. And the monitoring data that we have been gathering is really assisting us in having these high-level discussions. One of the outcomes of the data that we have gathered that is assisting us in discussion is the creation of the Wapichan Conserve Forest. Our forest within our territory has been protected for generations by the Wapichan people. And in our management plan, in our territorial management plan, which I will ask Sienna to share at some point to the group here so you can have a read of our territorial plan. It speaks about development of the Wapichan Conserve Forest. And we have been in discussion with the government in relation to this. We have another meeting coming up very soon. And it looked like we are making some traction to say which areas should be protected within our territory and why it should be protected. So the data in itself is helping us a lot to really bring some sort of protection to our forests. And Sienna, you can tell me if I'm running out of my time or not. The next thing is that we are assisting communities to move forward with their land claims. The Wapichan territory was claimed prior to independence by our farmer leaders. However, with the land titling process that was being developed over the years, we have only received a small portion of titles to our territory. So we still continue to advocate for legal recognition to our territory. And through the Conserve Forest program is one way that we are doing it. The other thing that we are doing is the Headwater Protection Program. Again, through the monitoring program, with the data that we are having, it is allowing us to really justify why our Headwater Protection Program should be recognized nationally. So we have also showed evidence of illegal mining, deforestation, like you've seen in the slides. That has assisted us to get the attention of the government to say, look, although you have the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission as a mining regulatory body, we still have a lot of issues here due to mining, water pollution, land degradation, deforestation, and even some social problems and health issues. So with that also, we were able to identify high levels of mercury within our people, because we also did a monitoring program on the health of our people and the impact of mining on our people. And it was very alarming to see that one of our villages, Parabara, has a high level of mercury beyond the safety limits of the World Health Organization. And this for us is a concern, and we are able to use this evidence also to really have these discussions that we are having. So, like I said, though, it is really, yes.
So I'm going to give you just maybe 2 minutes to wrap up.
Sure.
And I would invite you, I mean, it's so powerful to hear both how you've used data proactively to protect and assert the value of the territory and to respond to mining. And I wondered if you might want to say just perhaps an example of the way you've been able to push back with regulators. And then for those who are interested in doing similar things, how has SRDC sort of managed to have your data taken seriously by the government? I know those are big questions for 2 minutes, but I believe in you.
Okay, so with the data, we were able to. Sorry, Sienna, go for the question, please. Sorry about that.
How has SRDC managed to have your data sort of taken seriously by government regulators? I know there are examples of where the government has cracked down.
Yeah, so what we did was actually, we use international forums as well. We sent some of the information to the United Nations human rights courts, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We send our monitoring data to them, and they in turn wrote back to our government telling them that you need to work with the Wapchan people. And because of that, they were able to, and also through our monitoring program, we were able to highlight a lot of the issues. We send reports to the Environmental Protection Agency, to GGMC, to the Minister of Natural Resources, and to the President. And once the President see our report, he would ask the agencies and ministry to really act upon our report. And now they're telling us that they want to recognize our monitoring program. Hence, we are now developing an MOU between the SRDC and GGMC to have a collaboration as to how do we continue to monitor the Marudi area. So the data in itself has been used a lot to like carry pressure on the government from both nationally and internationally. And it has also enabled us to now start to formulate some sort of agreements as to how national monitoring and community monitoring can work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tushar. Thanks for really running us through some of what it looks like in practice, how you've been able to use the data, both in relation to pushing back on mining, but I also think very powerful to hear about the ways that the monitoring data has been able to be used to assert the value of your headwaters, of the forests, and push for proactive visions of conservation of Wapashan Wij going forward. We're now going to move to Kwabena Ibrahim of Advocates for Community Alternatives, who is also going to speak to his experience with community monitoring, including the strategies that communities can use to ensure that the data they gather is in fact recognised as rigorous and credible by outside actors while remaining community-led. And our prompting question before I introduce Kwabena officially is, what is one challenge that communities face when monitoring or documenting mining-related harms? So I'll just give folks a moment to read that in the chat. And thank you also for everyone who's putting questions in the chat. We are gathering them and we'll return to them. All right. So Kwabena Ibrahim is a geoscientist who holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Geology and Chemistry and an MPhil in Geology from the University of Ghana. He's worked with several mining companies across West Africa, and he has an in-depth knowledge of the processes and the activities associated with various types of mining and mineral exploration, and is also an expert in environmental impact assessments and environmental monitoring. Kwabena, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. I'm going to tee us off with a question. So when communities are observing or experiencing impacts, how do you help them move from those concerns that they are seeing to a clear decision about what needs to be documented or tested through monitoring?
Thank you very much, Sienna. Thanks for the question. Okay, so the starting point is by taking the observations that the community has made seriously. So we don't start by telling the communities what we think the problem is, but rather we start by asking a series of questions. So we can ask them what they have observed, where it is happening, when it started, what has changed, and then what the impact has been on communities. So from here, we'll try to turn the questions into a clear monitoring question. So for example, in the Sumandu work, communities have raised concerns about environmental changes around sources of water and also farmlands. So these areas were affected by activities upstream of mining activities. So rather than simply saying that the water was polluted, we worked through the observations and locations to determine what could actually be documented and tested. So that's my mean asking whether there has been a change in water quality, whether a particular source is being affected, or whether soil in the area used for agriculture show evidence of contamination. So the important thing is that community help define the question and then replaces that matter. So while the technical team helps determine what measurements or analysis are appropriate to answer that question. So I see the process as community observation, clear monitoring question, appropriate evidence, and then interpretation. So, importantly, not every question requires laboratory testing. Sometimes photographs, GPS coordinates, repeated observations, interviews, or simple field measurements may be enough to establish that something has changed. So laboratory evidence becomes important when we need to test a specific scientific question or substantiate a concern more rigorously. So in a nutshell, this is how I think we can approach it.
Process out so clearly, and also making the important point that not every question requires the same set of tools to answer it. Maybe digging in a little bit on an example, you were involved in community monitoring of the Samandu Iron Ore Project in Guinea. So using that example, what are the practical choices that you made collectively that helped strengthen the credibility of the evidence to outside actors while keeping the process accessible to communities and grounded in their leadership?
Thank you for the excellent question. Okay, so credibility is a matter of having a transparent and repeatable process. So rather than making the monitoring unnecessarily complicated, we try to simplify it. So in the Simandou work, we combine community knowledge and then field observation with relatively straightforward scientific procedures. So we documented sampling locations, used GPS coordinates, clearly identified samples, followed appropriate sampling and handling procedures, and then we use laboratory analysis where necessary. We also compared the analytical results against appropriate environmental or water quality standards, where it is water or soil. So that gives the evidence a stronger basis when communities subsequently engage with the regulators or companies. So I think there is an important balance here when technical rigor should not just mean making the process inaccessible to communities, but rather make it accessible to them. Community members are able to participate meaningfully in identifying the sites, explaining what they have observed, documenting field or conditions, recording GPS locations, observing sampling process, and maintaining records. The more specialized activities such as laboratory analysis are usually carried out by technical people as partners. Another important lesson from the Simandou work is that the importance of being honest about what the data can and cannot tell us. So, for example, the limited sampling could identify contamination and differences between sample locations, but it could not definitely establish the source or pathway of every contaminant. So most importantly, in the Simandou case, most of it was superficial, so you could see it. So I think that what actually strengthens credibility rather than weakening it is we making things transparent, and we should never claim more than the evidence supports. So I think the principle here is keeping the process simple enough for communities to participate in, but rigorous enough that the evidence can withstand scrutiny. So that's how I will address this question.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you highlight that it's not the complexity of the process, it's keeping it transparent, accessible, systematic. And thank you also for highlighting the relevance of testing against regulatory standards so that you're gathering data that then has legal implications under relevant regulatory standards. So Kobina, my last question is, based on what you shared, what lessons would you highlight about making technical evidence useful over time for when communities need to engage companies, regulators, or other stakeholders?
All right, thank you very much, Sienna. For me, the most important lesson is that data by itself is not necessarily evidence that communities can use. The evidence becomes useful when it is connected to a clearly defined community concern, properly documented, interpreted, and then translated into an issue that someone needs to respond to. So in the Simandou case, the laboratory results did not simply remain as numbers in a report. They help identify particular locations and parameters that required further attention and monitoring. The findings also help strengthen the basis for communities and civil society to raise concerns with stakeholders. I would emphasize that this needs to be thought about from the beginning of the monitoring process. Before collecting the data, we should just ask ourselves, who might need this evidence, and what decision or action do we want it to inform? That affects how we document the evidence and what level of quality control we need. The other lesson is that community monitoring should not be a one-off exercise. Environmental conditions change over time. A single sampling event gives you a snapshot. In the Simadu work, for example, the limitations of the sampling design led us to recommend denser sampling and then monitoring across different seasons to better understand temporal variability. So useful evidence needs to be traceable, repeatable, and then cumulative. Communities should be able to build a record over time, showing that what they observed, what was measured, what changed, and how companies or authorities respond. Ultimately, the objective is not simply to produce a scientific report. It is to give communities an evidence-based help that will make them ask better questions, challenge unsupported claims, engage decision-making makers, and demand appropriate action. So for me, our role as technical partners is not to replace community knowledge with scientific knowledge. It is to help communities strengthen what they already know and observe, so that can become evidence that is credible and understandable and actionable. So based on the work, some people have been compensated for damages they suffered in relation to land degradation, and some efforts are also being made in an attempt to clarify or purify the water, reduce the turbidity and all that. But the actions is a good step, but the results are still far from what is desired. Thank you.
Thank you for such clear and practical takeaways. That was great. We'll move to our final presentation from Jan Morrill about how community-generated data can contribute to broader movement building, advocacy, and accountability. And we have our final prompting question, which we'll put in the chat, which is, in your context, what is one shared demand that community evidence could help mining affected communities bring into broader advocacy and accountability efforts? So I'll just pause while folks are able to look at that in the chat. Okay. Jan, I see that we're coming up on time, so we might hold you to a tight sort of 8 or so minutes. Jan is an international mining campaigner at Earthworks. Her work focuses on identifying and promoting best practices for mine waste storage and supporting communities that are living in the shadows of tailings dams. She's the author of Safety First, Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management, which we'll certainly share after this call. And before coming to Earthworks, she spent 5 years in Central America supporting community-based and national organizations on issues related to mining and water rights. Jan, I'll do the same and tee you off with a question, which is, from your experience, how have you seen community monitoring fill gaps in knowledge about mining activity?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak with everyone today. And thanks to the presenters before me for the fantastic information. I think I want to underscore one point that I've heard from all of the presenters so far that I think is a good grounding, a good piece of grounding for us, is that local communities know best what is happening in their area and what the solutions are to address problems. And so community monitoring is a tool, as we've heard, to empower communities to engage in processes to do the things that they know are best for themselves and their communities. So I think, really understanding that and focusing on that is key. Another piece of kind of grounding and baseline setting that I'd like to acknowledge is that the mining industry is an industry that is built on externalizing costs, right? There aren't mines that don't harm the environment in the surrounding areas, that don't impact the environment in the surrounding areas. It's baked into the model. And so the mining industry and mining companies have a vested interest in minimizing discussions around their impacts as much as possible because it's part of their business model. And so what community monitoring and community monitoring projects are able to do is to push back on that business model of externalizing harms and externalizing costs onto surrounding communities. And this is a trend across the industry, right? So I think one of the pieces I'd like to highlight is that we've heard great examples from local communities in Haiti, in Guyana, but this is global. This is worldwide. Communities around the globe are facing similar problems and organizing to confront them in similar ways. And the need to do that comes from this business model and a lack of transparency from the mining industry. So the mining industry is notorious for not publishing information, for not providing information, for pressuring governments to keep information confidential, private, and not in the public sphere. And so community monitoring helps fill a gap globally that is pushing back against this lack of transparency. And I'll give one example of kind of where we're at with how little we know about mining. Every mine creates waste. Most waste is stored in tailings dams. There's no global registry of tailings dams around the world. We don't know how many there are or where they are. The estimates that we have heard is 20,000 to 100,000 tailings dams, but nobody really knows. So communities documenting where tailings dams are is actually really important because there is no repository of that information. Mining companies know, sometimes governments know, but not always. But so communities engaging in that, documenting that, looking and assessing the issues and harms caused by mine waste is really important. And then one other piece is that there's a big difference between what mining companies say and what happens on the ground. So this is what we've heard from the previous presenters, right? But this is also an industry-wide problem. So Earthworks commissioned a study in 2026 that looked at modern hard rock mines in the United States and found that 100% of the mines said in their permitting documents and their proposals to get permits from the US government that they would, or from the states, that they would not impact water quality standards around the mine. Our research found that 76% of them were polluting surface water or groundwater after operations began. So the reason that community monitoring can be so important is because it's ground truthing and fact checking what the mining industry is saying to regulators, to its investors, to the companies that are purchasing the metals that the mines are producing. And it's showing that the mining industry is not doing a good job of both predicting what their impacts are going to be and telling the public, the stakeholders and their companies and regulators what their impacts are as well. And so in order to rein in, or in order to effectively regulate the mining industry, we need binding regulations that protect workers, communities, and ecosystems. We need strict ongoing regulatory oversight. We need mechanisms to sanction companies when they violate environmental and human rights standards. And we need human rights and environmental due diligence from the entire supply chain, from the investors that are investing in mining companies and from the purchasers that are buying the metal that the companies are producing. And community monitoring can inform each of those pieces and inform them both on a local level and on a global and more movement level.
Thanks so much for really grounding us in the systemic kind of industry-wide issues and how what we're talking about interplays with that. My second and last question is really if you could ground us then in some examples of how evidence from one community can contribute to broader movement building and advocacy efforts beyond a single case.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to share a couple different examples. One is after a tailings dam failed in Brumadinho, Brazil in 2019, there was kind of a global response to the tragedy that happened. The tailings dam collapsed. It killed 272 people. It flooded kilometers and kilometers of river downstream and wound up impacting the water supply of 3 million people that live in the area. So it was a massive, massive tragedy and a massive, massive destruction for the environment. There was a global response from regulators, from the mining industry, from investors, from the United Nations, that started to look at how do we rein in kind of these dangerous practices around mine waste storage. And there was also a response from communities who are living next to tailings dams and who are being impacted by mine waste every day. And the fact that communities had the knowledge of this is what happens when a tailings dam is built next to us. This is how it impacts our water. This is how it impacts our air. This is how it impacts the crops that we grow or the fish that we fish in the rivers around the mine. Really informed the response that came out of civil society and impacted communities. And so Earthworks, along with our partners and some trusted technical experts, wrote a set of 17 guidelines called Safety First Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management that look at how to improve tailings management that came from community experiences and then was consulted with over 300 community members, frontline community activists, academics, Indigenous representatives, union representatives, to really make sure that these guidelines that we were establishing were based in the experiences of people on the ground and responded to the needs of people on the ground. So the fact that communities were documenting the harms that tailings were causing in their area and able to share those in very specific ways made this document really a compilation of the different issues that were arising and proposals to address those. Another example I'd like to give is with companies that are purchasing metal. So there's an initiative called Lead the Charge, where civil society organizations and others and their allies are engaging with automakers who are purchasing metals and minerals for electric vehicle batteries to really push them to improve their supply chain, to do human rights and environmental due diligence. And they're ranking them on a yearly basis based on their commitments to different human rights and environmental standards. This campaign looks to the impacts on communities to be able to help formulate their engagement with automakers and the requests and policy changes that they are asking for. And so community case studies are included in their report, but also communities are providing information to this coalition around what needs to happen to make suppliers take responsibility. And then lastly, I'd like to just give a very specific example of a community in Argentina that's next to a gold mine that's run by Barrick Gold. There's been a series of toxic spills in the river downstream from the mine, and the community did its own water monitoring, has done its own water monitoring for years to document when these spills occur, because they're not made publicly available and they're not often acknowledged by the mining company or the government. It's similar to what we've heard from other presenters today, but I think one interesting thing that this community has done is they've connected with other communities that are impacted by the same mining company and started to push investors in Barrick Gold to force the company to do its own water assessments and make those public. So they've leveraged their data that they collected on the ground of the impacts of water from this mine to go to investors and ask them to take responsibility and push the company to do better. And so there was a shareholder petition filed a couple years ago that was calling on Barrick to hire independent water quality or to do independent water quality assessments and publish those results. So data from individual communities can also be used collectively around the impacts of a specific company to engage investors or to engage purchasers as well. And hopefully I stayed fairly within my time, Sienna. Thank you.
You did, Jan. Thank you. And thank you so much for both the really practical examples and also just the inspiration of seeing some of the ways that communities are pushing back and contributing to these systemic fights. We have just under 15 minutes for Q&A. We will be sending a recording from this webinar and the resources that panelists have mentioned. We'll prioritize, I think, questions that come through the chat rather than going to folks directly to speak, although we'll see if we have more time. So we've been grouping questions, and I think the first question, Kwabena, I'll ask you, as it's one several participants have asked about, which is, are there or what are the minimum protocols or standards that can make community collected environmental data credible enough to be effective in engaging with companies and in legal action and engaging with regulators? And Kwabena, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Please, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Of course, no problem. Several participants asked, are there or what are the minimum protocols and standards that can make community collected environmental data credible enough to be used in legal, regulatory, or company engagement, especially when it's facing challenges that it's unscientific or it's biased? What advice would you give?
Okay, thank you very much. So my simple answer would be that there are standard protocols that are used in assessing or evaluating the pollution. So there are various standards that are accepted. WHO has its own. Some nations have theirs, like the US EPA has its. France also has some standards, and then the UK as well. So when you carry out assessment, you can easily compare it to what is acceptable and then what is not. So it is very easy when you use those standards. Your data that is gathered cannot be challenged. So sometimes when you do that and then you realize that it is within the safe limits, you don't raise issues. But once you compare it to accepted standards, when it's above that, your case is clear. So there are other research, peer-reviewed research that are also available that one can also rely on to do some of these works. I don't know if I've been able to tackle the question very well. So that's why the involving experts become very important. So the experts know how to interpret these things better because that is their routine work. So they can assist communities with that, and then their evidence will become very strong and robust. Thank you.
Thank you. An important question was raised about safety and security, particularly for communities that are attempting to do monitoring in conflict-affected contexts. So how can questions of safety and protection be integrated throughout the evidence gathering, advocacy, and action process so that risk isn't increased to community members? I'd love to hear from any panelist who'd like to speak to this. Jan, it came up during your intervention, and so I'll invite you first if there are reflections from the communities you've worked with.
Sorry, Sana, could you repeat the question one more time? Thank you.
Of course. The question is essentially for communities who are gathering evidence in conflict-affected or otherwise unsafe contexts, how can questions of safety and protection be integrated throughout the evidence gathering, but also advocacy process?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Thank you. And, just again, to acknowledge the broader trends, environmental defenders that are opposing mining projects are targeted more than any other industry from violence and threats and intimidation. So this is a very real problem that we see across the world. There are so I've seen different tactics used in different places. For example, in Brazil, there are community water monitoring projects around iron mines in the state of Minas Gerais, where the community members that are collecting the data are submitting that data through an anonymous portal to an organization that's based in the nearest city that collects it, compiles it, de-identifies any personal information that might have come with it, and then compiles and publishes it and uses it in their advocacy. So there can be systems set up to anonymize the data collectors throughout the process if there are threats or fear of retaliation for being involved in those types of projects. Also, I think another strategy can be looking for the trusted allies that can be the public face of the publishing the results or collecting the samples if necessary. So who are the academics, who are the NGOs, who are the legal aid organizations that might be able to kind of be the public facing stakeholders, while the community is supporting with the information, with the expertise, with other types of support. But it is really important, I think, before engaging in any organizing to do those risk assessments, to think through what are the possible outcomes and what ways can communities take to protect themselves.
Thank you very much. I'm just pausing for a second in case any other panelist wants to complement anything that Jan just shared. Go for it, Nick.
I just want to
please.
support the previous speaker. Indeed, environmental defenders are targeted, and myself being one of them. However, I think it's important that the data that you gather is being used to the relevant authorities, and don't stop there. If you have to go above their head, at some point they will have to recognize that the data we are gathering is one of accuracy, and it can flag policies and regulations that has been not adhered to, both by the regulatory agencies and by the miners themselves. So in asserting your rights, really using the NGOs, international bodies and courts has really brought our data to national recognition. And us being in the process of developing an MOU between the SRDC and the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission is testimony that our data, our monitoring program is really recognized. So I guess the more you formalize these things, it puts the government under some obligation to protect our environmental defenders as well. Thank you.
Much to Shanik. There was also a question around when communities are wanting to take action, a very sort of fundamental question about roles and resources. And Kwabena, I'm going to put you on the spot as the first person to answer this question, but I also welcome input from all panelists. What support do communities need to start? What actions can communities begin on their own? What are the tools or additional support that they need for monitoring? And where can they look for tools and resource support?
Thank you very much for the question. So it's simple. They start right from what they have and then where they are. So it's observation, what they simply see. And that is the first step. So if there are changes, they note that down. And then as it occurs, and then when it occurs and how it occurs. That is how they start before they look out for what they don't have. So after you've done that, the next step is you reach out. So you let people know what you are going through. If there's a Ghanaian language that if you don't sell your sickness, you're not likely to find a remedy for your disease. So you reach out, let people know what you are going through, and out of that, somebody may come to your aid. And then also build a network. Once you have a network, you can easily learn from what others have done. As we are sharing here, we are all learning from various actions that people have taken. So from that, you can easily reach out and then somebody may assist you. So like I said earlier in my submissions, we start from observations, ask series of questions, and then when it becomes complicated, then the tools that you need, for instance, if there's a need for an air quality monitor or something like that to be installed in your community, then that can be done, because that is quite expensive and challenging. So start from where you are and then what you have, which is your observations, and then document or note them down so that you can communicate that concisely. I'll give you an example. There was one community that last year, when we went to the Smadu communities, we couldn't reach out to them. But what the community themselves did was that they were having their river polluted. So they fetched it into a bottle, a 1.5 liter, and then they brought it to our partners who happen to be in that area. They brought it to them for them to see what they are actually going through. So these are some of the ways that we can actually handle some of these things without necessarily relying or waiting for us to have sophisticated tools before we start. Thank you.
And that reminds me of advice a scientist gave us many years ago in the context of Haiti work, of if you're worried about the water and there are no other resources, put it in a bottle, label where you took it and the date you took it on, and put it under your bed for when you can seek support with testing in the future. Would any other panelist like to intervene on this question?
I guess I'll just reiterate what Kwabena already said so well, is that early observations can be really powerful, whether either, prior to any mining occurring or as it's occurring. Documentation, it can be simple. It doesn't have to be, complex analytical analyses of water or other resources, but pictures, verbal notes on your phone, written notes, any records of how resources are already being used in your community can be really important. And I'll provide one example in a legal case that went forward where, the impacts of mining were obvious from satellite imagery and visual observation, but it wasn't clearly documented how particular water resources were being used to then prove harm. So that kind of evidence can be very powerful in the legal framework. And you can start from the beginning with that.
Well, thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Apologies for everyone whose question we did not get to. It was very rich, what everyone has put in the chat. And certainly I know we'll be doing follow-up for this call, from this call. So to close, I'd like to invite each panelist to share in 30 seconds or less, I know which is a tall ask, one takeaway or piece of advice that you would give for communities considering or doing community monitoring. I'm going to go in reverse order. So Jan, Kwabena, then Tushar, Nick, Beth, and James.
Yeah, so I would just say, I think as evidenced by the presentations on this call and the questions in the chat, communities are not alone. You're not alone in facing these problems. You're not alone in trying to find the solutions. So look for your allies who are in your neighboring communities, your allies who are in your country, like universities or legal aid organizations. Unions and mine workers can often be very good allies for communities. And then the allies that are internationally, people that are working with investors, people that are engaging auto companies, people that are working with jewelry makers. There are people out there that can support you. And so using your local knowledge and your strength to build support more broadly will help in the long run.
Kwabena.
Thank you. So in addition to what Jan said, I will say that communities should try and then document everything that they observe consistently and systematically. So the local knowledge that they have is a starting point. So once that is combined with reliable measurements, clear records, and evidence collected over time, it becomes much harder for companies or authorities to dismiss the concerns that they have. So they should not just report that something has changed, but find a way of keeping a record, showing something, even if it's verbal. This and this and this happened in this day. If you're able to get pictures of it or samples, as the scientist mentioned, that is great. You are able to show clear evidence. That is what will turn a community concern into evidence for action. Thank you.
Now, Nick, one advice or takeaway in 30 seconds for other communities.
Yes. So to communities, I guess having the process of how you develop monitoring, why you develop monitoring, if you can determine that, it will really point you in the direction where you should go. So like the first thing should be is to map out your resources, see what you have within your territory, identify how traditionally these resources are managed, and then we develop a management plan to say, okay, this is how we are going to manage our resources. And with management comes monitoring. So hence the monitoring program came into being. And that in itself has been a tool that has really been allowing us to advocate for the destruction, advocate for our land rights. So the process of monitoring, to get to the stage from the beginning of mapping to the stage of monitoring is very important for communities. And thank you very much for this opportunity here. And we look forward to working with anybody, any support that can be given to our end in the South Rupununi as well. Thank you.
Me too, Shal. Beth.
It's hard to know where to fill in because everyone covered it so well already. But yeah, I'll just echo that documentation and developing a plan. Get together with, gather your team, develop a plan before you start monitoring so that, everyone can be on the same page and kind of get a collective understanding of where to prioritize efforts and resources, time, money. And that will help keep things kind of routine and organized and defensible moving forward in your data collection efforts. And thank you all for your time and for this opportunity to chat with you all today. It's been great.
Thank you. And James, you have the final word. One piece of advice in 30 seconds for others considering monitoring. Hopefully, ou toujours avec nous là, James. Okay, we may have lost James. Thank you for those rich set of closing comments and for all each of you have shared and your generosity with your knowledge and experience. It's been a pleasure to moderate this conversation. And Carlos, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sienna, and thank you everyone for the extra 5 minutes. Thank you also for the speakers for such a rich discussion and sharing your experience so generous. Just very quick, we know there were many questions, comments, and responses in the chat that we cannot fully address, but we will collect all of those comments and questions directed to the panelists, and with their support, we will follow up with a short document that will respond and address some of those pending questions and share additional information and resources. So we will send that together with the recording and presentations in the next couple of days. Thank you everyone again for joining and participating. Please stay connected with the Grassroots Justice Network for future spaces and opportunities to keep engaging on this and other issues. And have a good rest of your day and week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you all.
Merci.
God bless each of us. Bye.
Adios. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.